Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Cavan-Smith. Tonight, for the second year in a row, DR Congo becomes the country worst affected by conflict displacement in the world. Activists warn that it's facing a mega crisis, with over 5,000 people fleeing their homes every day. Also, where's Johnny? News of the death of French pop legend Johnny Hallyday has rocked his fans in Ivory Coast. The artist gave several concerts in the country in the 60s and was widely popular there and in many other francophone countries on the continent. And we hear from the organiser of a financial technology lab in Tanzania. Dozens of mentors and startup entrepreneurs from across Africa are brainstorming ideas about the combination of tech and banking access, an area of research of huge importance to the continent. But first, international monitors have warned that across Africa, the first half of 2017 saw more than 15,000 people forced from their homes every day. That's a total of almost 3 million internally displaced people, a number that is far higher today. Internal displacement has soared in Nigeria, South Sudan, and DR Congo. For the second year in a row, political tensions there have made it the country worst affected by conflict displacement in the world. Shirley Sitbin has more.
There are 4 million of them, 4 million people who have had to flee their homes in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and find refuge in makeshift camps. This compound was originally a primary school. It's now packed with 9,000 men, women, and children who have fled violence.
I was working in the fields when I heard gunshots. People were already running when I asked, "What's going on?" Some people told me that war is coming and that a soldier had just been killed. I left the main road and I ran into the forest without anything.
Internal displacement has sharply worsened this year due to an upsurge of violence and a delay of the presidential election. In this church, 80 people have been sleeping on a wet floor. 4 of those who have arrived here have died, including 2 children. In some centers, the lack of clean water has led to the spread of diseases like cholera. It has killed more than 800 people nationally this year. On top of the 1.7 million people who have been displaced within DRC this year, others have found refuge in neighboring countries, like in this camp in Angola. Food is distributed here once per month.
Per person, 13.5 kilos of maize meal. It's about 1 kilo of beans, salt, and also oil is something like less than 1 liter.
2 months ago, the UN activated its highest level of emergency, level 3. But that has brought little money and resources. Millions continue to struggle to find food.
Look now at some news in brief. In Cameroon, thousands of Anglophone villagers have been ordered to leave their homes in the southwest as the government ramps up a military crackdown on armed elements of a secessionist movement. Separatists have reportedly killed at least 8 soldiers and policemen over the last month. English-speaking communities say that they are being sidelined. The Francophone government's been accused, though, of rights abuses in their pushback against peaceful protests over the last year. A clampdown around Mamfe in the area of Manu has sent hundreds fleeing to the towns of Bamenda and Kumba. Uganda's begun the withdrawal of 281 troops serving in the African Union peacekeeping mission in Somalia. It's part of a UN plan to reduce the number of AU soldiers by 1,000 by the end of the year, as international backers of the AMISOM mission in the country try to hand over security to national forces. Kenya, Burundi, Djibouti, and Ethiopia are also expected to pull out soldiers by the end of the year. The number of 15 to 19-year-olds dying of AIDS-related illnesses in West and Central Africa has risen by 35% in just 6 years. Activists have accused governments there of complacency in tackling HIV/AIDS. They're concerned that in the west and centre of Africa, the fatality rate linked to the virus is more than twice that elsewhere on the continent. The UN's Children's Agency reckons that nearly 80% of children in West and Central Africa are not getting the antiretrovirals they need. Now, French singing legend Johnny Halliday's death on Wednesday has rocked and rolled fans across Ivory Coast. The 74-year-old toured the country in the 60s, and as our correspondent in Abidjan's report, many there still remember his hits with pleasure.
The bustling streets of Abidjan. Johnny Hallyday has died, but for his Ivorian fans, the love of his music lives on. His sounds have transcended generations.
Oh Marie, si tu savais allumer le feu.
Tributes have been pouring in, even on national TV station RTI.
Le prince du rock a tiré sa révérence.
A Johnny impersonator to remember his biggest hits.
My father had Johnny records that we listened to together. It rocked our childhood.
The news was announced in the morning papers, unmissable for the editorial director of the channel.
Here in Ivory Coast, there are three singers that the whole population knows: Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson, and Johnny Hallyday. He toured the Ivory Coast in 1966.
Music that also brings together the biker community in Ivory Coast. They're among the first to celebrate the singer's memory.
Tonight we'll celebrate the life of Johnny Hallyday. We'll talk motorbikes, drink whiskey, and of course, remember him.
Everyone's descended on the biggest rock venue in Abidjan, the place to be to remember the idol of their youth.
Well, dozens of firefighters in Abidjan spent hours on Wednesday battling a huge blaze that erupted at a paint factory. At least 2 people are in hospital after fire triggered a chain of explosions at the site. Several nearby businesses were also destroyed. Dozens of mentors, entrepreneurs and creators from across Africa have been meeting in Tanzania this week for a boot camp aimed at brainstorming and developing ideas in the field of financial technology. More than 80% of people on the continent don't have access to formal banking services, even as economic growth ramps up the demand for access to new financial products and services. So fintech startups on the continent have attracted tens of millions of dollars of investment. Jake Kendall is the director of the lab running the workshop in Dar es Salaam. Some of those on the project could get up to $50,000 of investment in their idea. And earlier I asked Jake why the fintech industry was so important for Africa.
One of the entrepreneurs here was just telling me about what motivates him. His family, his father was sick and had an emergency. They went to the hospital, and while his relatives were running all over town trying to get money, his father ended up dying because they didn't have the money in time to pay for the hospital and didn't have insurance. So you can see how the need for finance is really critical here, and the lack of kinds of financial services that you and I take for granted is really acute.
So what are the unique challenges in the field when looking at serving a particular African market?
Yeah, well, there can be some really surprising challenges. One of the things is, you're talking about consumers who are at a much lower level of income than they are in developed countries like France or the United States. And to serve people like that, you really need to be hyper efficient. These are people who are going to take very small loans, have very small bank accounts, maybe insurance contracts for very small amounts of money. And to be able to create those kinds of products and do it in a profitable way that's sustainable and it's going to grow in the long run, you have to use really high technology to make it efficient and to make it something that can be profitable, even though it's serving people at a really low level and creating value for them.
Jake Kendall there, and we will be getting a closer look at some of the ideas cooked up in that lab a little later on this week. So do stay with Eye on Africa over the coming days. Well, an artist born in Zanzibar has achieved several firsts with her win of the prestigious Turner Prize in the UK. 63-year-old Lubaina Hamid became the oldest winner of the Visual Art Award and the first black woman to win. The jury made its decision on the back of Hamid's trio of exhibitions in Oxford, Bristol and Nottingham, which showcased her paintings, prints and installations that celebrate black creativity. Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks very much for joining us. Do so again if you can. Take care.